Hey guys, it's me. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi. This is a book channel, if you couldn't tell. Welcome. And today I'm going to be talking about my top 15 classics that I love and want to share with all of you. Now, before we start, if you feel like you need some good karma for the beginning of this year, you could perform the selfless act of liking and commenting on this video because it helps with my engagement and stuff. So now that I'm done begging for likes and comments, we can get started. So this video is going to be split into 4 categories. We have novels, we have philosophy, we have plays, and poetry. And I'm gonna give you a few of my favorites for each of these categories. So starting off for the number 1 in terms of novels, it is Les Misérables by Victor Hugo. So a little bit of context, okay, about this. I was about 16 when I read this, and I was still in school at that time. And fun fact, everyone around me thought I was an idiot. My parents never say so, but I'm pretty sure they did. My teachers definitely said some stuff. My peers also thought that I was an idiot, and for me, I was like, well, I like reading. That's the only thing I kind of know that I'm okay at. I'm gonna fucking read this to prove to myself that I'm not a moron and that I'm capable of making my way through a difficult piece of literature. And I didn't expect to enjoy it. I just reached for this because I was like, right, I need to prove to myself that I'm not a complete moron, because the amount of people who have been telling me that I am is getting a little bit concerning. I read it and I loved it. I found myself to be completely immersed and engrossed in this story. For those of you who don't know, it is set in the Parisian underworld. Our main character here is a convict, an escaped convict called Jean Valjean, and he was in prison for 19 years. Now, to be in prison for 19 years, you'd think he would have had to commit an absolutely horrible crime, right? He stole a loaf of bread, and that is why he was imprisoned for that long. And after he escapes, my god, I can only imagine how difficult it must have been psychologically to be put in a situation where you are treated like a criminal for damn near 2 decades. Surely you start to think that you are, even if you're not. He is also constantly followed around and persecuted by an inspector called Javert, and he really wants to become a good person and do better and act for the good of society. We also meet a few other characters like Cosette and Marius. They are fairly archetypical characters, but to be fair, they were done very well, so that wasn't something I had an issue with. I think that the main strong point of this is that, first of all, it is a very good story. And I think that the reason that is so long, because yes, this is one story, it's one book, is that Hugo does not neglect plot for the sake of character development, and vice versa. It was such an immersive experience, and I would absolutely recommend it to anyone who likes to just dive into a novel and emerge a month later and kind of see time slow down around them when they're reading. It was just a wonderful experience. It gives you a lot of insight about how Parisian society was at the time. Okay, so next book is again one of my first loves, and it is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostojevski. I read this when I was about 17, and I found the plot to be very intriguing for a classic, because at the time I wasn't someone who read a lot of classics. I wanted to challenge myself more in my reading, so I picked this up, and it was absolutely worth it. I mean, I loved this, and I plan on rereading it very soon as well. So we follow a man called Raskolnikov who kills a pawnbroker because of financial issues, essentially, and he simply walks out and gets away with it. He is driven completely mad by the guilt and paranoia. All of this psychological, not so fun stuff ensues. While he could, in theory, get away with this murder, it's very difficult because his mind plays so many tricks on him. And what really stands out to me is the way Dostoevsky really takes us into the mind of Raskolnikov. We are stuck in this man's mind, which is not a pleasant place to be in. His paranoia and guilt and all that stuff drives him to have hallucinations, fever dreams. It's just so interesting because you follow this stream of consciousness of this man that has just killed someone, and you can't help but feel for him at least a little bit. And that was the first time that I was confronted with someone who is that much of a morally grey character, if you can call him even grey, and I was absolutely flabbergasted by the narration and the events that follow the murder. Even if this is quite an intimidating book, the fact that I was okay getting through it when I was 17, don't be intimidated, it's not going to be that difficult. And if you are into psychological thrillers, I would absolutely recommend this one. Okay, so next up we have Germinelle by Émile Zola. This is a book that I read last year, actually, 2021, and I really liked this book. It was my first first Zola read. I know, okay, don't scream at me. And we follow the story of Etienne Lantier, who lost his job because he beat the living shit out of his boss. I mean, that's an exaggeration. I think he just slapped his boss across the face or something. But still, he does lose his job, shockingly enough. And he sets off, and the only job he can find is at a mine called Le Voreux. It is absolutely horrendous, and he is confronted with the reality of the working class and how they struggle for food. They are cold, they don't have heating in the winter. It's all the upper class who own these mines, who reap all of the benefits, and just see this working class suffer so much when conditions just become too much for Etienne to see and handle. He finds himself leading this strike. I truly love this book because it was at a time where I was getting a lot more interested in politics, and it is actually scary how it reflects, albeit in a different manner, today's working class might be struggling with as well. And another thing that I really appreciated about this book is that Zola, even though he's one of those old dead white guy authors, wrote women in such a wonderful way. They were not one-dimensional. They had a very distinct personality, and they weren't your average little damsel in distress who needs help and just follows the men. It was very interesting to see how Zola pulled this off, given that he was at a time that clearly wasn't very lady friendly in literature, and I was very surprised by that, and it really stood out to me. So yeah, I would recommend this because it covers just very interesting topics, and Zola just did a very good job with the characters, the plot, weaving it all together. Really loved it. So the next book I'm going to be talking about is Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. I read this for school, and I expected to hate this book for several reasons. I had read Jane Eyre and a Jane Austen book as well. The one I read was Emma, and I started Sense and Sensibility, but it just wasn't for me. And on top of that, our English teacher at the time, it was for my advanced English class, was like, yeah, no, this book sucks. I had a lot of respect for my teachers at the time. Well, some of them. I had a lot of respect for him anyways. So I was like, oh great, no, I'm not going to enjoy this either. And then I read it, and I was like, what is this man talking about? This book is great. This is literally the only book to have ever reduced me to tears. This book forced tears out of me, and I'm someone who never cries for books. So yeah, it had a big impact on me for sure. So this book, essentially what it is about, if you haven't read it, I'm not going to give too much away, and if you obviously have heard of it and read it and all that stuff, I'm not going to bang on about it forever. So we learn from the point of view of this new tenant called Lockwood. He moves into this house called Thrushcross Grange and meets Nellie, the housekeeper, who starts telling him the story of the families who lived in this house and the house across the moors. Then one day, a young man named Heathcliff came along, and drama ensues, and that is when I realized how much I loved reading about these very morally grey characters, dare I say morally bad characters, because I realized that I could still empathize with them. I still found it in myself to feel sorry for them, to want things to go well for them. But then I also knew, I was like, wait, no, these people are not good people, and it really just fucked up my sense of justice and made me question my own values, and that is something that I really loved. I loved feeling this confused for some reason. So that kind of started me on a whole deep dive of morally grey characters. So if you haven't gotten there yet, I would say that Wuthering Heights is a good place to start. So the last novel on this list is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This again was one of the earlier classics that I read. We all know what this is about, I suppose. It is about this very charismatic man who is very vain, and he gets this picture painted of himself, and what happens is that the picture ages and he doesn't. I felt such a wide range of emotions while reading this. I think it's the narration and the character development that really helped things along for me, where I would get outraged at some of the things that Dorian would say. I would get very invested in some of the scenes in this book, and again, this is one of the books that started my love for classics. I'm not going to bang on about it forever because it is a book that a lot of us know about, but if you have not read it, if it is one of those books that you've put off reading, try making it a priority, because So good, so good. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so now the philosophy part of this. The first one is kind of an in-between thing where it is a philosophical novel. Candide by Voltaire. Me holding this up doesn't do much. Fun fact, I'm obsessed with old books. Have a few of them, but yeah, this is the edition that I have. Anyway, moving on. If you ever need a very short philosophical novel to reinforce your already pessimistic worldviews, my god, have I found the book for you. In this book, we follow Candide, our main character, who doesn't have the best time in the world, to say the least. He has fairly bad luck. Moving on from being a soldier in the Bulgarian army to being shipwrecked to living through an earthquake and being robbed and swindled and outwitted many more times than any person should ever be. Our man Candide really has the most rotten luck on the planet. Tragic things happen to all our main characters, who are Candide, Dr. Pangloss, who is a philosopher who follows Candide around on all his journeys, and Cunégonde, who is the woman that Candide loves. If you're French, you probably realise how absurd of a name this is. What I loved about this book is that Voltaire seems to be having the time of his life as he writes about all these characters' bad fortune. He writes it with such a tone of comedy and humour, and he discusses horrible shit. He discusses murder, rape, theft, natural disasters, and all the while the tone is comedic and light and funny. You know, the point is the world is shit, isn't it? I mean, we might as well laugh about it. The one point where he does drop his cheerful demeanor is when he starts to talk about slavery. It does come as a shock because throughout this entire story you are met with jokes and witty comments, and that drives the point home so much more powerfully because the change in tone kind of hits you quite hard, and the atrocious descriptions of slavery, my god, like I will never forget them. Not that anyone needs reminding that slavery is bad, but it does remind you of certain atrocities that have been committed. It just had a very big impact on me, and that was a point where I did start looking a lot more into the history of slavery just because it shocked me so much. We'll try and get to a bit more of a cheerful tone, shall we? So the next one is Plato's Symposium. I've spoken about it multiple times on my channel, so if you've been here for a while, I'm so sorry. I will describe it very briefly. It is a conversation about love and what love is. That is it. This book is a conversation, which I feel like makes it a lot less intimidating. It is not like this huge philosophical ramble, you know. This isn't Kierkegaard, this isn't Hegel. This is just a conversation between friends, and they discuss what love is. I'm sure we've all had these kinds of conversations before. Well, this time you're just reading one. A very short read. If you are interested in getting more into philosophy, this is a very good place to start. I mean, it's very short, very easy to read, very easy to get through, and quite interesting as well. Okay, so now we can move on to the play category. The first play that I want to talk about has been one of my all-time favourite books for a very long time, and I'm dying to see it performed one day, and that is Endgame by Samuel Beckett. I actually can't find my copy, which is very upsetting. This play is just absurd. Characters in this book are waiting for nothing but death. That's the one thing. Nothing really happens. They're all a bit mad and eccentric, and they have these little moments where they interact with each other, but there is nothing positive in it, and I loved it so much. I do think that this is one of the plays that you would want to go into not knowing much, because I do think I would be kind of ruining the experience for you if I were to tell you what happens. But if you are someone who enjoys reading from a very morbid and pessimistic point of view, I definitely think that you will enjoy it, and it's also very short. I think it's about 40 pages, maybe 50. Next play I'm going to be talking about is Macbeth by Shakespeare. This was my first Shakespeare that I ever read, and I haven't read that much Shakespeare since, but this one is my favourite. If you are not aware, we follow a Scottish general named Macbeth who visits 3 witches, and they make the prophecy that he will one day become the King of Scotland. So, egged on by his wife and his own ambition, obviously, but mainly his wife, he ends up murdering Duncan, and again we get this whole thing of being eaten up by guilt and paranoia. What I loved about this book was Lady Macbeth, who was such an entertaining character to read about. I mean, she was pure evil, and I was fascinated by the fact that in such an old story, a woman could be represented in that way, because she obviously, while she was presented as evil, she was this very majestic kind of character. This play is definitely one that I tend to turn to for comfort. This has just become an old friend at this point. If I'm feeling down every once in a while, I'll just give this one a read, and it feels great, honestly. By the way, if any of you have any suggestions as to which Shakespeare plays you recommend that I read, I'll take those. The only ones I've read are Hamlet, Twelfth Night, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and obviously Macbeth. I haven't read many of them, so if you have any recommendations, let me know. Alright, let's move on to the poetry, shall we? Now, the first book that we're gonna get out of the way just quickly, okay? The Iliad by Homer. Even I'm getting sick of myself at this point, so instead of banging on about it for hours, I'm just going to link the discussion video down below that I made on this. Next, we have two French poets that I really enjoy. So the first one obviously is Victor Hugo. Again, he's just a fantastic writer. It's for very good reason that he's gotten the reputation that he has. My favorite collection that he's written is Les Châtiments. I'll put a picture of the English translation here. If you speak French, obviously I would recommend you read it in French. And the next French poet that I absolutely love is Boris Vian. So I think that the biggest thing about Boris Vian's poetry is if you can somehow find a way to have it sung or read by him. There's loads of videos of that on YouTube. Boris Vian was literally like a jack of all trades. He wrote songs, he sang, he wrote novels, poetry. I think he was like an engineer at some point, and like a friend of Sartre's. So I'm just like, this man knew how to do everything, and his poetry is absolutely wonderful. You would think that someone who knows how to do so many things would like kind of half suck at all of them, but no, he's pretty much good at everything. My favorite poem by him is Le Déserteur, and it was also turned into song, and it made me cry very, very hard. And finally, my all-time favorite poem, and possibly the most pessimistic and blasé view of humanity to have ever been expressed through literature, The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. Now, this is quite a difficult poem. The first time that I read it, I didn't know what the fuck was going on, okay? It is a long poem as well. It is split into 5 parts, so the burial of the dead, a game of chess, the fire sermon, death by water, and what the thunder said. It is a difficult poem, okay? I'm not gonna lie to you. And this is not the kind of poem that you read because you're like, oh, I like these rhymes, it's pretty and enjoyable. No, if you're gonna get any sort of satisfaction and enjoyment out of this, you're gonna have to work for it. And I think that one of the reasons why it's such an important part of my life is because it's made me develop this taste for effort when it comes to literature. I find it so much more rewarding now to read a text that I kind of actively have to work towards and invest into to truly get something out of it. Every time I read this poem, I get something new out of it. Not once have I reread this and not had some sort of a new idea. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna show you. This is what it looks like at this point, and I also have like a little notebook where I write some shit in it as well. So yes, when you start reading this, I would highly recommend reading some essays about the Wasteland, watching some explanation videos, because they do help not only to get a basic understanding of the text, but sometimes these explanations will stimulate your mind as well, and you will be able to come up with your own theories and interpretations. So if you are up for a challenge, I would absolutely recommend it. Working through the process of understanding it, oh my god, like has been one of the most, I'm not gonna say fun or enjoyable, but it has been a great experience. It has probably been one of my best poetry experiences ever. So with that note, I am going to end this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you're still here and you're new, you can follow me on Instagram and on Goodreads so you can keep up with everything that I'm reading, and I hope to see you very soon. Goodbye.